Hello and good afternoon. I'm Adam Guzzo with the U.S. Department of Energy's Better Buildings Initiative. I'd like to welcome you to the April edition of the Better Buildings webinar series titled Taking Control, Best Practices in Energy Data Management and Tools for Success. In this series, we profile the best practices of Better Buildings Challenge and Alliance partners and other organizations working to make buildings more energy efficient. Thanks to all of you for joining us this afternoon. Before we get started with our presentations, I want to remind our audience that we will hold questions until near the end of the hour. So please send in questions through the chat box on your webinar screen, and you can do that at any time during today's webinar. And we'll try to get to as many of them as we can at the conclusion of the presentations. Today's webinar will also be recorded and posted to the web, so you can listen and view the slides at another time, or share the webinar with your colleagues that weren't able to join us today. So now that we have the logistics out of the way, let's dive into our presentation. Next slide, please. Today, you're going to hear from three outstanding panelists from the City of Boston, MGM Resorts International, and the Commonwealth of Kentucky. We're going to talk about the process, strategies, and tools their respective organizations have used to implement data-driven energy management. But before I introduce them, I want to briefly provide a bit of broader context for today's presentation and give you a sneak peek at a new DOE resource that will be available this summer. So you've probably all heard it said that you can't manage what you don't measure, but I really like Peter Drucker's variation on that saying, which is what gets measured gets improved. And that really is what this webinar is about today. It's about the importance of data to setting realistic goals, making informed decisions, identifying opportunities, measuring success, and then using data to reassess or reevaluate your goals. That's applicable across any industry, but obviously the focus of today's webinar is how to institutionalize data-driven decision-making or data-driven energy management in and throughout an organization. Next slide, please. With that in mind, the Department of Energy has developed a resource we have simply called the Energy Data Management Guide to help organizations establish a robust and sustainable energy data management program. The primary audience for the guide is the public sector, states, local governments, and schools, but the principles are broadly applicable. Now, this is a screenshot of the homepage of the Energy Data Management Guide, which is currently under development. But when completed, it will be a web-based tool that outlines the 7 steps to taking control of your energy data and establishing an energy management program that is driven by data. The guide was developed after extensive research, and the 7 steps are organized around these 3 central pillars that you see in the colored boxes on your screen: generate buy-in, build a solid foundation, and hardwire energy management. Next slide, please. So users will be able to navigate through the tool and track their progress through the 7 steps across this timeline that you see at the top of the screen. And that'll show how they're progressing through, and also be able to see how they're progressing through the content down the left side of your screen. This is a screenshot of the landing page for the first pillar, generate buy-in, and the first 2 steps in the 7-step process that I mentioned previously. Next slide, please. And then embedded throughout the tool, and in addition to the proven strategies that are outlined throughout the 7 steps of the guide, we have these, like I said, embedded case studies that you can download. So you can see here an example from the city of Gillette, Wyoming, as well as customizable templates and worksheets exemplified in the green box there on the screen, along with relevant examples embedded throughout the guide from other states, schools, and local governments across the country. And you can see one of those examples from the state of New York there at the bottom of the screen with that little red state map. Once the energy data management guide is released this summer, we will do a more in-depth webinar to familiarize folks with the tool. So again, this is just a little sneak peek, and we'll be sure to distribute it to those that attended today's webinar as well. Next slide, please. So with that, let me introduce our presenters. All of these guys have a lot of experience, so I won't run through all of their experience, but instead just hit some of the highlights. And our first presenter today will be Adam Jacobs from the City of Boston. Adam is the energy manager for the City of Boston. In his role, he monitors and reviews energy data to track progress towards meeting clean energy goals, verifies energy performance improvements from operational and capital investments, and identifies potential opportunities for additional energy improvements. Our next speaker will be Mark Campbell. Mark is the Director of Sustainable Facilities for MGM Resorts International and the company's corporate sustainability division. His responsibilities center on identifying and implementing energy conservation projects across MGM's portfolio of properties. And then our final speaker today is Andrew Carter from the Commonwealth of Kentucky. Andrew is the Energy Management Program Manager in Kentucky's Division of Facility Efficiency, which includes responsibility for the Commonwealth Energy Management and Control System, which you'll hear more about in a bit. So as you can see, it's a great panel. And when these guys are not working to help their respective organizations save energy, you can find them hiking and camping in the great outdoors. So I think you can see that by Adam's headshot here. And if we don't get to all of your questions today, look for these guys out on the trail in your area, and you can learn more that way. So with that, I'll turn it over to our first presenter, Adam Jacobs from the City of Boston. Next slide.
Great. Good afternoon. Can everyone hear me okay? Or Adam, can you hear me okay?
Yep, you're great.
Perfect. All right, so next slide. So as mentioned, my name is Adam Jacobs. I'm the Energy Manager with the City of Boston, and I wanted to give everyone sort of a nice, better weather-looking picture than what Boston has been experiencing the last month or so with the repeated nor'easters. Next slide here. So just as a quick outline of where and how the City of Boston consumes energy, we have about 67,000 streetlights. We have over 3,500 fleet vehicles, and the vast bulk of our energy consumption is coming through about 300 some odd municipal buildings. And that includes everything from the Boston Police and Fire Department to the school department to the libraries, community centers, pretty much any administrative building that is within city government. Next slide, please. So I wanted to go through a couple of different sources and uses of energy data, and kind of cover it from a ground-up standpoint. If you're just starting with an energy management program, going through some of these different sources of energy data is a good start, and doing some evaluation of when and how you need this information. So the first and foremost place you can get energy data, obviously, is the bill. It comes every month for the most part, unless your utility is a little bit late on billing. And there's a lot of really good information in here. So you'll get a service address, which also usually is of decent quality, but sometimes you got to correct them on that. The rate class, so what tariff schedule is your electric, gas, or water account on? You always find the service period to and from dates. The usage, which is of importance to things like the Better Buildings Challenge and measuring energy performance in your building. And then the cost. So, under cost, you're going to get all sorts of different pieces of information from the commodity or supply component of your bill if you're in a deregulated market. So I guess that would also be in a regulated electric or gas market. And then under your delivery or distribution of your energy, depending on which service type you're talking about, there's a lot of really useful information to dig into there. So you'll have things like your demand charge if it's a large time-of-use electricity account. If your state or government has energy efficiency or resource standards or renewable portfolio standards, you can see all the information associated with how much you're being charged on a volumetric basis for those things. So the bill is kind of where everything starts as it relates to energy data. Next slide. And there's a lot of really useful things you can do with that data. So I covered some of them. The one that obviously comes to mind is budgeting. Your organization budgets for everything from salaries to utilities, overhead, and just general administrative costs. So looking at what your budget is going to be for the following fiscal year is always a good thing to do. Once you have aggregated energy data, you can analyze the performance of your buildings and benchmark your properties through tools like Energy Star Portfolio Manager, and compare yourself to your peers via any of those indices that have aggregated energy performance data. If you're like the City of Boston, then you have a greenhouse gas inventory that you're required to report on every year. So for municipal operations, we report out our GHGs annually and have targets for reducing those. And just more budgeting. I mean, these are really important things, and they impact the bottom line of pretty much any entity and particularly within the city of Boston, we have a lot of very different services that the city is required to perform, from public safety to education to keeping the streets clean and well lit. And every single one of those entities is required to put together what their energy budget is, regardless of what the services they're offering are. So pretty much any large enterprise is going to have to deal with this. Next slide, please. And then more recently, particularly for the city of Boston, but just in general, there's your monthly bill, you're really going to get one data point every 30 days or so. Maybe you have a couple of accounts for a given building, so you might get a little bit more, but you're not really getting very granular with the data. So time of use metering data is a really valuable tool to look at when it comes to getting a better look at how you're using energy. And there are a couple different ways to look at this. So the frequency of the data that you're getting, you can look at it from both the how frequently is the data collected. So does your utility measure your time of use electric consumption in 5 or 15-minute increments? And then the other way to look at frequency is how often you're receiving that information. So City of Boston, for example, we have a couple buildings that we have real-time metering installed, where I'm getting updates basically for 3:11 p.m. right now on the East Coast. So I would have a data point from just a minute ago or 2 minutes ago now on a couple of our buildings' electric usage. But there's also different ways to get access to this data. So in Massachusetts, our utility companies are obligated to provide their TOU data to us or to any customer that has a time of use account with this kind of metering installed. They're required to give us that data once a year, and it's not quite as valuable as if you were getting it in real time, but you can look back through all of that data and see if you can identify scheduling anomalies based on the load shape of your facilities. So depending on what utility you work with, I remember I used to work down in the DC area, and Baltimore Gas and Electric would make that data available to you. This is a couple of years ago, but that data you could pretty much get the next day through their customer portal. And I know that's something that our electric utility is looking into as well. The data you can get from this, your kilowatt, your instantaneous power, your demands, and you can get the power factor, so the quality of the electricity coming into your building. Next slide, please. So the uses of this, I went through a couple of these, but to just go through them again quickly, looking at your building schedule to make sure that everything is, major equipment is coming on when it's supposed to and is shutting down when it's supposed to, checking to see if you have, your night and weekend setbacks in place. And it's a good opportunity to review, overall what your building's operations look like. Now, it's more valuable if you can get down below the aggregate, electric meter coming into the building. So if you have any sub-metering throughout the facility, but even just looking at something like this, you can get a pretty good sense for how tightly your building is scheduled and whether or not you have, a long ramp-up time for starting your heating and cooling. And, if you have peaky loads in the middle of the day that have to do with, anything process-driven in your building, those things will jump right off the page. A couple other things that we've been using energy data for is measuring energy savings, so performing measurement and verification on any sort of ESCO-related project, or even just something that your organization chooses to fund through capital dollars. You can identify, did those savings actually materialize for anything that has substantial impact. So it would have to be a pretty major piece of mechanical equipment in order to actually see those savings. But again, it's all back to, scheduling of equipment and your ability to, manage the building's load on a daily basis. Something else we spend a good amount of time with is demand response. So this is where your organization, whether through energy reduction or through on-site generation, reduces the stress on your grid. There are a lot of different programs around the country. In New England and Massachusetts specifically, we're part of the ISO New England, basically demand response program for capacity. So at the beginning of every year, we commit for a certain number of buildings a reduction in kilowatt load and we get compensated for that. So it's something that, I'm sure you can look on DOE's website for more detail on things like that. And actually, oddly enough, you can get right back to budgeting again with your TOU meter data. If you're tracking this stuff in real time, for Boston, our distribution charges on our electricity accounts, they can make up as much as 3/4 of our distribution bill, that once a month, peak. So if you're tracking your peak demand every month, you can have a pretty good idea what your bill is going to look like. And it's also the easiest way to reduce your bill, since so much of the charge is built up on that, once a month demand. Next slide, please. So for the city of Boston, we actually had an interesting process play out where through our competitive solicitation, we ended up segmenting our energy data management based on, the two sources I mentioned to you earlier. So we have worked with a vendor to basically take in our incoming electric account and gas account bills every month. And I think in total, we're close to 4,000 accounts that we're paying every month. And we're paying a vendor to essentially review these charges, make sure that they're accurate, and issue a report to our auditing department that we then use to pay off our bill every month. So they're telling us what charges are good to pay and what charges, we should have a little bit more review with the utility company or our supplier before paying. And through this more, close analysis of it, we've been able to pick up over $1 million in errors and credits in our bill. And this was in the first 18 some odd months of a contract we had with this vendor who's auditing our bills. And just the return on paying a little bit closer attention to it has been immense. I pulled out a number here. It's a little bit over 400% return on investment for what we got out of just paying a little bit closer attention to the charges that we were accruing every month. Next slide, please. Now, this is something that I don't think it's come up with other organizations that we've spoken to very much, but this is something the city of Boston found to be, an innovative strategy in that for our time of use metering data, we actually had a lot of different sources of that kind of data out there already through, one-off pilot projects or, when we enrolled in a demand response project or a program, we got time of use metering installed. And what kept happening was each, meter that we got installed through whatever program it was, ended up having its own proprietary software and, its own menu that a building engineer would have to navigate its way through in order to actually view the data, which, if you're working in an operations-based environment, you're not really sitting down in front of your computer all the time. You might not have time to, remember that username, that password, that login, and how to navigate your way through the menu. So what we actually did was take the raw data from all of these meters, and through working with our Department of Innovation and Technology, essentially our IT department with the City of Boston, we used an existing dashboarding and analytics tool called Tableau to create pretty much custom dashboards. So if you look at either of these are mobile app optimized visualizations that are interactive. You can click on any of these at any time and see what the load was for the last 2 days. And we, custom branded all the coloring with City of Boston and Boston Public Library color schemes. So, it makes it, feel like a little bit more of an official internal document. Next slide, please. Sorry, my computer might be frozen here. Oh, there we go. So we've used this same application for a number of different problems that have come up, or challenges rather. So over the last winter, the City of Boston City Hall Plaza was host to what we had as a winter winter garden where there was an ice rink out on the plaza, and we had to monitor the electric load for this plaza event. So this is another dashboard that we put together to monitor both City Hall's electric load as well as the load that was being contributed from the ice rink out on the plaza. Next slide, please. And I'm yet to see, an organization that can put something like this together, which was a really custom application where we had real-time data on the performance of a number of combined heat and power generators. And we wanted to put those, put that data into a similar dashboard that would monitor the basic first law efficiency of the units. So here I can track in basically real time the efficiency of our cogen units and work with our facilities teams to identify whether or not it makes sense to continue running the units once we get into those spring or shoulder seasons. Next slide, please. And this might only be applicable for public entities, but any organization that wants to be more transparent about all of their energy consumption and emissions data, we post all these data sets to Analyze Boston, which is the City of Boston's open data portal. So anyone can go in, download any of this data. We have our own visualizations for internal use, but if anyone is interested in checking out this data, it's all available to the public. And I know it's good for sharing data with vendors who might want to do business with the city, as well as academic and research institutions that want to have real world data to do any sort of research or analysis. And I think I just have one last slide here. I know I'm over time. Next slide, please. I guess this is just a note on, working with outside vendors for energy management problems. And, I just wanted to highlight that in, the acronym Software as a Service, SaaS, I really like to focus on the service side of things. So when we went out to do our procurement, we really wanted to find a valuable service that was delivered via software, not just, a software tool that we expected to fix our problems for us. And now this last one is my last slide, and I'll just jump right through it. So, just a couple closing notes. That Tableau license that we had for that business analytics tool, that was an existing license. The city didn't need to spend any money on. So, looking at what tools you have at your own dispense before you go out and buy new ones is always a good piece of advice. When I did the stakeholder assessment of, what we needed out of a bill management system, I definitely made it, a point to identify problems and challenges other departments were having and, how the work that we were doing could help solve those problems. So, make your tool a solution to other departments' problems, especially if that department pays the bills. Our budget office really appreciates the, close attention we're paying to this data and, what we're getting out of it. And just really last thing, I'll just skip this one, is to pay attention to the staffing part of RFP bid responses. Are you getting people who can help you out with your energy data challenges? Are they software engineers or are they energy experts who are deep within the industry and know what challenges you might be facing? So sorry, I went a little bit over on time there.
Thank you, Adam. Yeah, that was really insightful, and appreciate you sharing those valuable insights with the group. So next slide. Next we'll hear from Mark Campbell from MGM Resorts International. Mark.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me on the webinar today. You can go ahead and go to the next slide, please. I'd like to give a little background on MGM Resorts International, talk numbers here for a minute. So we're 27 hotel offerings across the country with in Las Vegas alone, 740 acres and about 48,000 guest rooms. So I'll give you some of that scale, many restaurants, energy intensive areas, and 77,000 employees. We have an ever-growing amount of convention space here in Las Vegas in particular. And so with all those numbers, we have a large, albeit shrinking amount of energy consumption, hopefully, if I do my job right, of over 1.1 million megawatt hours per year. So just seeing that kind of scale necessitates looking at energy data and managing it appropriately. So go ahead to the next slide, please. So we're going to go over sort of three areas here about how we do things at MGM. And the first one is really looking at our employees. In many ways, as a sustainability division that I'm part of, we're consultants, internal consultants to MGM. And, we start at our employees. We have a program that's a web-based program. I'm going to talk about a little bit how we educate and engage our employees. Also going to talk about how we manage our real energy data, similar to what Adam was just talking about, and how we distribute that information to more relevant parties, facilities, finance, and such. And then finally, we're going to talk about how you can build on successes to drive looking at energy up to the executive level. And just note on the photo that we were able to include here is of our 8.3 megawatt solar array on Mandalay Bay, which has helped us manage our energy bills over there at Mandalay quite a bit. It was completed in 2016 and covers about 26 acres on the convention space there. Go to the next slide, please. So, the mission of my team in sustainability and the company really in general is to reduce our environmental impacts. Even if we were able to bring our impacts to zero with 77,000 employees, we have an ability to drive, a much larger impact. And so we created this platform in 2014 called My Green Advantage, and it's a web-based platform for our employees. And it number one goal was to provide education around all areas of sustainability, not just energy. We're talking about water, waste, education around the environment and resources in general. So it's designed to engage all of our employees across properties and really recommends behaviors, information, allows people to share photographs. I was just looking at one today. We were focused on Earth Hour and for information about why MGM participated in Earth Hour and what it meant to the environment. There's activities and tasks that you can undertake to get points. And what we found with this tool was what we thought was going to be an educational platform turned into a much more robust engagement platform with our employees. So if you could go to the next slide, please. The flow here is just basically to say that what we learned was we could create some pretty friendly competition, mostly friendly competition between both teams of properties and groups, but also down to the employee level within those groups. And so this is a snapshot of what our last 30 days would look like in terms of points accumulated by staff members. And you can go from a little action such as turning off the lights before you leave the office, which might get you 5 points, up to doing something at home like installing solar, which might give you hundreds of points. And it's all on the honor system, but it's quite fun. So we have over 20,000 of our employees have become part of this platform. It's driven all sorts of innovative actions. I've got a photo here of an on-site operation growing produce at our property in Detroit, MGM Grand Detroit. And then we're able to track what those impacts are, and you can see we've achieved over 5 million actions since 2014. Many points earned, and we translate that into what these things mean in terms of kilowatt hours, trees, and other things. And interestingly, we track our energy savings in seconds, which I had to do some math there just to make sense to myself. That's about 32 hours powering New York City. So we can go to the next slide. So moving from engagement with our large employee base down to looking at our more granular energy data, we have a goal to use as little energy as possible without impacting our guest experience. Obviously, that's our as an entertainment hospitality company, we got to keep everybody happy. And so our group's been dedicated to collecting data similar to what Adam mentioned, utility billing, processing that data, trying to make sense of where we need to prioritize our work. But we also look at pretty detailed building data as well. And so, in the past, we would, go through what would be a typical like billing and review and payable process to where we would deliver an energy report on a monthly basis to a property, but it would be, 2-3 months behind. That makes it difficult to, find those granular events that might set your demand peak or big spike, something run away or being overridden. So over the last couple of years, we've been able to, use different types of software and a couple of vendors to get to the point where we have more real-time energy data, both going to our division as well as, vice presidents of facilities and others. And then, for us, it's critical to look at how the building's doing itself in order to find these things. And so, we've had building management systems that were installed when many of our buildings were built that, were legacy and fundamentally had very little storage of data. And so we've made a large push into, starting with collecting data, the most relevant data being sub-metering and data points around our largest energy areas, such as our central plants, both heating and cooling plants. And, again, working with our stakeholders to understand what data is important to them. And then following that up with, upgrading our building management systems to other parts of the building. And just to give you some perspective, in Las Vegas, we're looking at over 60 utility meters. We've sub-metered, a couple hundred loads underneath those meters. And we're looking at about 30 plus gas meters as well. We have a lot of data to look through, and bringing that data into more real-time view has been a great jump for us. Go to the next slide, please. So the essence of what we're talking about on the slide is just that data, can drive projects, and it's driven projects for us, in the past, even when we were looking at, months old energy data, and it continues to do so now that we're in more real-time type situations. So I've got a picture here of a pressure independent control valve and some of the data, and we had a property that had a significant drop in energy consumption. We didn't know why. We asked the property, and they said, oh, we put in 30 of these large pressure independent valves on air handlers, and we're saving a lot of chilled water, and that's cascading back to our central plant. And so we were able to verify that, and through that data, we ended up rolling out that project to 7 additional properties, performed measurement and verification, and we've reduced, in some cases, the runtime of an entire chiller for a year by reducing energy demand from our air handlers. And pilot testing or testing of new products is something that every one of our properties is very interested in doing, and so that's another sort of friendly competition environment that we have built where our properties enjoy being the first one to do something, and we encourage that and work with them to measure things like that. We also have a maintenance contract on our chillers, and by sub-metering our chillers and bringing that data in and running reports on it, we're able to hold that company accountable for proper functioning of our equipment. That's part of our deal with them, and so we're able to carry that thought process to other areas of the business as well. And then finally, we are able to do measurement and verification. So, I've got a sort of generic graph here, but this is real data for 2017. One of our buildings got a major upgrade in the control system in the central plant, along with VFDs on chillers and enabling heat exchangers for the use of free cooling. You can see red being baseline, blue being predicted, and green being actual energy consumption by month for that property. And this property has become the absolute sales pitch test case for our group when it comes to doing upgrades across our properties for control systems and such. Go to the next page, please. Talked about building data and data points, and brought a real specific example here of what we're doing at the Bellagio, and this is across our portfolio really, but it started here. And so work with the property to understand what type of data is most critical to them when they're running the building, and what do they want to know now. And so we've got a look here at 4 major points that they want to know when they look at our software. And so this data analytics platform at this point has over 100,000 points from across our properties. We're using it to track things like you see here, but we're also tracking issues with equipment that might require maintenance, and we're also tracking overrides on equipment, and that's become something that has been a great feedback loop with our properties. So we'll give them a report in the morning that says, here are all the points that were overridden, here's how long they were overridden, and they take that every morning and run through it and look at what they can change. And if there's something that is fundamentally always overridden, we dig into that a little deeper. Finally, I mentioned central plant. We've really focused on the efficiency of our central plants, and so we can track that number, down to the interval of, I think, about every 5 minutes on this graph. So we can go to the next slide, please. So bringing this back to, the corporate, sort of culture, we've got an employee base that's become engaged. We've got leadership that encourages, follow the principles of all of our CSR pillars across the company, but sustainability is a major one. And we have groups at each property that are dedicated to looking at sustainability and coming up with ideas. We've gotten quite a few ideas that have spread across our company. And, I came across this quote last week. It's attributed to several different people, and I'm particularly interested in the last half, which is that everything that can be counted, not everything that can be counted counts. I'm encouraged. I'm reporting to a CFO as the leader of our sustainability division, and her mentality is that we want to avoid having too much dumb data, if you will. And so we really try to dial in on what's important and take action on that. And the results of successes and data and delivering the data to the right people has gotten to the top of the company. And so MGM executives have set goals. In 2017, it was a goal for all of our properties to do LED retrofits and complete all front of house, non-specialty areas. We've actually gotten up to the point of 1.4 million LEDs installed into this year in 2018, and it goes to the level of having KPIs on energy and energy related tasks that are tied to bonuses. And so it creates a loop of engagement and also motivation. But everybody's very proud of these projects and these results. And so with that, I'll wrap up my presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. That was fantastic. Before I turn it over to Andrew, just a quick reminder to send any questions you may have through the webinar chat box. We've already got a bunch, but continue to do that, and we'll collect those and address them during the Q&A period at the end of the session. So our final speaker is Andrew Carter from the Commonwealth of Kentucky. Take it away, Andrew.
Thanks, Adam. Like Adam mentioned earlier, I'm going to be talking about the Commonwealth Energy Management and Control System. If you're not familiar with CMSIS, you can think of us like most other energy management information systems. We're essentially a data project. Data relating to our building operations, energy usage, and cost, with one real goal: how do we maintain comfort and reliability in our buildings while reducing the energy consumed and associated costs? If you could go to the next slide, please. One more. Thank you. A little bit of background. The notion of CMSIS came about 10 years ago with House Bill 2, which would eventually lead to KRS 56, and that says that we need to report on our energy consumption, expenditures, what savings measures we've taken, and how we're doing on said measures. So we brainstormed a web-based enterprise software system that could collect utility information, create outputs to EMARs to pay bills more simply, giving fiscal managers kind of a carrot to use this software. Integrate with building automation systems and act as diagnostics tools to find operational improvements. So with those goals in mind, we went to work on an RFP in 2010, which was awarded to Noresco with Interval Data Systems as their subcontractor. We paid for that with our grant money. And if you fast forward to now, we've added about 21 million square feet to the portfolio. We're tracking about $34 million in annual utility costs over 1,350 accounts. But we're still growing. The goal is to get to 36 million square feet. That's the footprint of all of the executive cabinet non-university buildings. If the universities want to join as well, they're more than welcome. But that's our goal. So next slide. And I'd just like to briefly cover some of the tools that we use, some of the projects that we've got going on and completed by using the available data, and other projects where just kind of awareness has influenced decisions where in the past it may not have. Next slide. So starting with utilities, Adam Jacobs mentioned earlier, utilities is where it all begins, that monthly bill and the information that comes off of it. So you can see here that graph on the top, the bars are your current 12 months. We've got a weather normalized shaded background, and you can see that comparison from then to now. And we're getting that utility bill data a couple different ways. Manual entry, like I mentioned earlier, the fiscal managers are entering this information into the system as they pay the bill, ideally. And we also get electronic data interchange, EDI, for the utilities that offer that. The big one, and both of these guys mentioned this, interval data. Each dot represents a daily kilowatt hour consumption. And so at a glance, you're looking at a year's worth of data, and you can really cleanly see how we're doing as far as scheduling is concerned. The tan dots are the weekends, and your blue dots are your weekdays. So it looks like this building is running a really effective setback program, and the schedules are all looking really nice. Next slide. Next slide, please. Have we switched?
Yeah, we're on slide 37, Andrew. I think you may want to go back one.
All right, go back to 36. It's not showing up on my screen. There we go. All right, so with the interval data in mind, we're doing the same thing with BAS data. We're pulling in about 200,000 trend points over 130 or 140 buildings, and we've got it broken out into several analytics tools that IDS has developed. The first one, the top one, we're not going to go into detail about this, is comfort scores, where you can look at every zone on an air handler and pick out zones that don't look like they're maintaining comfort within the space. And this is just for during occupied times. The next one down looks at just run times. So you can grade your schedules. The equipment that is scheduled longer sticks out like a sore thumb, as you can see there. We've got a lot of 10-hour, 12-hour, and then you jump up to maybe a 16-hour operating load per day. The next graph down shows damper positions. It's got a little bit of green on some of those bars, a little bit of red, but mostly yellow. That means the valves or the dampers are modulating to maintain space temperature. We would really want to look at one if it was pegged all the time. That bar would be red, and that means it's having trouble maintaining the set point. And then we've got a diagnostics chart down at the bottom. Now this shows averages for the entire building, and then you can use the filters on the right to kind of zoom into what pieces of equipment you'd like to see. And we've got that for primary systems, so your your hot water, chill water systems. We've got it for air handlers, and we've got it for our terminal units. So I'd also like to note that these kind of tools would be incredibly difficult to build in-house without the help of a third party. They add building expertise, controls expertise, IT and data expertise, all that to the table, which really complements my staff really well. So with that, I'd like to get into some examples of work that we've done, talk about 3 buildings or so, and some of the results that this has brought about. So next slide. This is the Cabinet for Human Resources building. It's a little over 300,000 square feet. We've been working to lower the pressure in the ductwork while maintaining proper air distribution. So you can see here we've been adjusting our static pressure reset from 4 inches water column to 2 inches water column, and that provides a dollar savings of up to $46,000 a year. That has kind of been raised back up, not all the way back to 4 inches all the time, but we're having some balancing issues that we're working through. They're actually going to be doing a capital project replacing all of the VAV boxes through the building, and that's driven by the fault detection program that we have installed in the building automation system. And using the data from that, we can see that most of these VAV boxes, which are nearing their the end of their useful, well, they're way past their useful life. So that's kind of driven a large capital project. We've added VFDs on the air handlers, the supply fans. There were 4 of them. They were 125 horsepower. 4 return fans, I think they were 50 horsepower. We have added VFDs to stage those on and off, whereas initially 3 supply fans were running at 80% 24/7. And the next thing is revising the schedule from 24/7 down to a 12-hour day, 6 to 6. And so you can see here, this is based on allocations, master metered campus. We actually do have most of these buildings metered now, and are working to take in that data and use that instead of the estimate allocations. But for the campus, we're showing a savings of about $150,000 a year. Next slide. The transportation cabinet office building, it looks pretty and impressive, but the HVAC was a mess in this building. We had an under the floor system with not so reliable terminal units, and we've got a VAV system, and the VAVs needed recalibration as well. But these systems kind of fought each other. It's an open floor space. So one thing that we did, and it's kind of a no-brainer, was adjust and make consistent all of the cooling and heating set points through the building, so that at least we could agree on that. We recalibrated 104 VAV boxes, or worked with maintenance to do that, and we revised the schedule from 24/7 to 6 to 6. And these are pretty easy things to do. We've got a long list of projects, and so I just want to highlight a couple, but you can see here that the work is paying off. We've got about $234,000 a year for this campus, which includes 1 more building, which I'm going to talk about, and then a smaller building, which we haven't done that much work at. Next slide, please. The other building is the Kentucky State Office building. We have replaced a lot of control valve actuators here. We've got VAV boxes that used to, they were having trouble maintaining space temperature. So we've adjusted that. They're all working very nicely now. We tried a standby mode as a pilot project on the 8th floor, and we use wireless sensors, occupancy sensors to do that. What we really found was that our schedules were pretty tight with the occupancy of the building. So we're going to try those sensors down on the first floor where they've got some classrooms and auditorium space. So this is another component of that $234,000 annual savings. And we're getting about 100 here, so it's not too bad. Next slide, please. Tracking the projects. The IDS operational reviews were really providing us a lot of good recommendations. So last year we got together and built a project tracking tool that's integrated with our EMIS. We've got 838 projects on here as of Friday. And we've also got that linked to our trend data so that we can pull trends, flag the projects that we've completed, and hopefully show where that has made a difference in the operation of whatever device or piece of equipment or set point that we're looking at. Next slide, please. And while tracking all this information, we've found a commonality. A lot of these issues are kind of controls related. Some of them are sequence related. And so we're starting to, on new constructions, review the sequences of operations from the engineer to make sure that it's clear enough to get their point across to the controls vendor, who then doesn't have to get creative whenever they're working on a new building. So this is an example of $220 million renovation for the Kentucky International Convention Center. We've reviewed the engineer drawings, and so the next step is to review the control sequences whenever they're done implementing those. Next slide, please. And then these are projects that my division is not necessarily doing, but our sister division, Engineering and Contract Administration, does all the capital projects and construction projects for the state. So we've got just a few things here. Central Lab boiler replacement project. Normally in the past we would have just RFP'd it out and gone with the cheapest bid. Now I think because we talk about it so much within this building, it's kind of put emphasis on reducing operating costs and energy costs. So they're making different decisions. Same with the Capitol Plaza Tower complex. That tower on the left is no longer standing. It's going to be replaced by a building similar to the one we have on the right. The construction versus renovation was about the same. The operating cost should be about a third of what it was before. Normally, I'm not really an advocate of tearing down a building, but apparently with all the factors in play, that was really the way to go. Then the gas procurement contract. We pre-purchase our gas for 4 of our largest sites. We pre-purchase it in the spring at a really cheap rate, and it provides savings on our gas costs in the wintertime. So this fiscal year, we've saved about $170,000 just by purchasing that gas in advance from a third party. Next slide.
And Andrew, if you could wrap up here shortly, we need to move to the Q&A period. Appreciate it.
Sure thing. So this is my last slide with content on it. Just wanted to show that, you know, all this summed together, looking at the data, making changes to the buildings when we need to, getting the word out there, and affecting decisions that are made on other projects and equipment replacements really save a lot of money. So for the total portfolio, we're looking at a annual savings of about $5.8 million right now. And of course, in the future, we hope to see that number go up. Next slide. And this is a snapshot of the dashboard homepage. It's public facing. It shows monthly energy data for all the buildings that we have turned on to report to the dashboard. So if you have some time, please stop by kyenergydashboard.ky.gov. And with that, I think the next slide is thank you. Thank you for everyone's time today.
Thanks, Andrew. That was a great way to wrap things up. So the next slide, please. Just some additional resources. That was a lot of great content, and if you want to learn more, I won't go through these in detail for the sake of time, but there's a fact sheet on the Energy Data Management Guide that I talked about, as well as some success stories on Boston and MGM and Kentucky, and some more details about some of the things that they're doing. So I would encourage you, all of these resources are linked, so I would encourage you to take a look at these at your convenience. Next slide, please. So we will go now into the Q&A portion, and we will probably, we're at 3:55, so we will take about 10 minutes to do that Q&A for those who can stick around. We'll go a little over our time, and then we'll wrap up. So there were a few questions from the audience about the types of vendors that our panelists use for their various systems. For the sake of time, I'll ask that those folks follow up directly with our presenters about that. Their contact information will be provided at the end of the presentation. So I'll start with just a general question for the whole group. Maybe a couple of you guys can jump in, but let's see. So there's a question here about how you get buy-in. So as you guys, especially if there's not like a fiscal or an actual dollar incentive, how have you guys been able to get buy-in from leadership to really implement some of these activities and really implement energy data management across your organizations? And if maybe each of you wants to answer that one quickly.
Sure, this is Adam. I'll start off. I work out of the City of Austin's Environment Department, but when I did my stakeholder needs assessment for what energy management tools we needed, I, really took that to heart, that it was something that needed to be, more valuable than just what the Environment Department needed. So I spoke to, multiple people within our budget office, our auditing office, and our IT department to do a full, stakeholder assessment, so that I made sure what we put into the scope of work for our RFP, encompassed everyone's concerns, and that really helped with buy-in, because now that we're up and running, everyone had a part in crafting, what we ultimately went out and purchased.
Yeah, this is Mark. I can speak to it as well. And I think it's, we may be a little bit different in the sense that the sustainability division at MGM has been around for going on 11 or 12 years. So it was something that was, became an imperative and really was driven by the leadership of our company. And so the folks that were the first movers in our company were able to, there was a lot of low-hanging fruit, let's put it that way. And they delivered projects that had better ROIs than just about anything we were doing as a company. And so that was able to lay the foundation for, okay, when they vet a project, when they deliver a project, it has success, and we'll listen when they come. So.
Great, thanks to you both. So another question, and just if you guys want to jump in on this one, about really tracking avoided costs versus true savings. And so how do you do that cost allocation, and really so that purpose being so management understands the true total savings from, as this person worded it, proactive energy management. You guys want to speak to that?
This is Mark. I can jump in a little bit. So we go through it a couple different ways. I mean, it's kind of interesting. You can think about it in the sense of how some utilities do their energy programs, where some of the benefits are very clear, talking about LEDs, talking about the way things are used on a regular schedule. But when we've done some of the larger projects that seem to be a little more obscure when it comes to measuring them, we've added into the budget to do measurement and verification, simply because we looked at it as a little bit of a long-term play across the company. So that I've been on both sides of doing M&V as a customer and as a provider, and it's there's a budget you need to have for it, but you also have to understand you have limits when you can measure things. So where you have large scale projects that can hit any type of meter or sub-meter, it's usually worth it to include an M&V budget and possibly include metering as a part of the budget.
Thanks, Mark. Go ahead, Adam.
Yeah, I guess, just to add on to that, everything that Mark's talking about with regards to energy conservation, I would echo that. But the other point that I would just draw back to part of what I was presenting is the $1.2 million that we, found through errors in our utility bills across the, 4,000 some odd accounts. Those were checks that we had cut back to the city directly for, whatever we were owed. So, there is this sort of illiquidness of tracking energy conservation, but by, better auditing and tracking the bills themselves, and you can just find, very real dollars that will go back into your budget that does allow your organization to do more. So, there's both sides of it just by better tracking and managing it. And then also, the conservation side of things, obviously you got to build up a business case through M&V.
Absolutely. I had a very small corrections building last summer. It's about a 2,200 square foot building. So think, the size of a house. And they had a $1,200 a month utility bill, just because they were on the wrong rate. So they were getting a demand charge, and of course it was a minimum demand charge because they weren't creating enough demand to do anything. And so once we got them off that rate, it was a $700 a month savings easy. So, I mean, yeah, that just echoes his point.
Adam, and do you any other examples or Mark similar to that you want to share, like real examples of those kinds of errors that were identified and savings that resulted from that, or returned funds, if you will? One of the large ones that we had was after we did a pretty large scale renovation of our central library. We had a new meter installed on the new switchgear, and the utility company never removed the old meter, so we were being billed on the same usage basically twice. And by analyzing bills and realizing we're not consuming twice as much as we were last year. I know the library's back up and open, but we're definitely not consuming nearly that much. It sort of created red flags for us. And then once we finally went through the process and identified it, they had been billing us basically double for 6 months on one of the largest facilities the city owns. So it was definitely showing up in the budget, and we're thrilled to be able to identify and recover those funds. That's great.
And yeah, you asked me to weigh in. I haven't been at MGM for almost 3 years. I have to give a credit to another gentleman in our group named Henry Shields, who's been all over our energy billing for quite some time. So in my time, we haven't had that issue, but I'm sure he solved many of those before me. So.
And I've heard plenty of cases where that is the case, and we've got some examples of that in our energy data management guide as well. So those often don't get talked about enough, but obviously those are significant cost savings that come from that. So a little bit different subject here, but there's a few questions for each of you along the lines of capacity and staffing. So Adam, I'll start with you, and question about if you don't have a full-time energy manager in a municipality, but you've got volunteers, how do you focus their time on the most valuable, what's the most valued use of their time, and kind of how would you get them started, and where would you put their energies into this kind of effort?
Sure. So, I mean, I guess, some of that you gotta flip back and do some soul searching there as to, what are your priorities? If your goal is to reduce your energy consumption and your greenhouse gas emissions, then if you're working with a part-time a staffer or volunteers, I would focus on your largest buildings first. So your city hall, your high schools, if you're a small municipality. But if you do have a little bit more time and you're kind of looking, like Mark said, the long haul here, I would recommend just doing a very thorough baseline exercise where you collect all of the utility bills, billing history for as much time as you have available, and just start from there, because the whole point of this session is managing the data to come up with better performance and better operations. So if you are just looking for savings and results immediately, target the biggest buildings. But if you really want to build a foundation for a strong energy management program, get a high school student who wants to learn about energy and have them do some data entry for you and start from there.
That's a great point. Thanks, Adam. And Mark, to you, can you talk a little bit about the number of staff that you have on your in your sustainability department, and maybe the kind of team members on that staff in terms of some of the skill sets?
Yeah, happy to. So our team is about 12 folks that serve as the corporate sustainability team for the whole company. I would say that half of them, about 6 of us, are most focused on things related to energy. So that goes from we have a couple folks that are dedicated to green building and development for new properties, renovations, any major work going on in design and construction, satisfying new codes, meeting LEED standards, satisfying jurisdictions, things like that. So we work very closely with them, but they're really integrated with our design and construction team. And then we have about 4 of us that are really, actually about 5 of us that are really into day-to-day operating property, information review and project execution. So, we've got a team member who's, really dialed in on boilers and things in that area, heating. We've got a team member that's really dedicated to lighting, and, myself and a couple others are really dedicated to more of the mechanical, air handler, central plant, maintenance type activities. And then, again, we all, all of us play in reviewing utility data, but there's 2 folks that are really keen on tracking all of our energy data, making it digestible, and spitting it out to all the relevant parties. Now, I will add, there are definitely quite a few, I would say, maybe a half dozen people that are outside of MGM that have helped us on quite a few projects, and whether that be commissioning or project management. Most of us, we don't really follow the ESCO model. We're kind of sort of an in-house ESCO, but we do use outside experts for energy modeling, M&V in some cases, and things like creating optimal sequences or doing engineering.
Great, thanks. And Andrew, question to you about how many energy analysts or folks you've got involved in tracking and keeping up with the amount of data you shared and across your portfolio.
Yep. So our team has 6 people, including me. So of the 5, 2 of them are more mechanically oriented. They handle kind of the remediation, project management side of things. The other 3 handle data. So 2 of them really are focused on utility bills and data accuracy. One, the third focuses on data flow. He's all over the data flow every day, from the BASs and EDI and interval data. So all together, we're just kind of all over it. And then I kind of float between the 2 and do whatever they need help with.
Thanks, Andrew. And then we'll wrap with a question for you, Andrew, for you, Mark. really getting into the more granular elements of the kind of systems and data. So when you're looking at the performance analytics on the equipment, can you talk about how detailed the information you get for detecting problems, and can you actually pinpoint the part of the equipment that's failing, or is it more of a warning that there's a potential problem?
I guess I have to say it's a little bit of both, but I can give some examples. So, you know, it's really, it's how much effort you want to put into it. So, for example, on chillers, we're able to get enough data. You know, modern chiller control panels spit out a whole lot of data, and we are able to, on some of our larger chillers, go to the level of understanding that the refrigerant charge is not appropriate for the season. And so, you know, that's pretty granular. It's about as granular as you can get in terms of pulling data and processing it and understanding what the problem is. For something like an air handler, we do have some rules written that are able to tell us if valves are either leaking by or broken, or if our controls, you know, are going out of whack. You know, we can get a notification that something's cycling. And then the last example I would give is, you know, we are able to see as well when we're looking at valves, or how our, you know, our air handlers are operating. You know, if a hot water valve and a chilled water valve are open at the same time, that sets a flag off immediately. And you know, a lot of those things can be controls related, but it could also be that the valve is stuck. And so, you know, when we deliver that information, it's basically, what's the problem? You know, what are we seeing, and what we think it is. And it's not always right, but we can be pretty granular when we need to.
Great, thanks. Appreciate it, Mark. So with that, appreciate those of you who stuck with us to hear some of the questions. Thank you to our panelists for sticking around to answer some more questions. Just a couple of slides here to wrap up. So next slide, please. So for those of you who have already signed up for our next webinar in our series, I just wanted to flag that has been actually postponed until July. So the next webinar in the Better Buildings webinar series, called Financing 2.0, Navigating Third-Party Financing for Efficiency Renewables, will actually take place on July 10th from 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern. So keep an eye out for that one and sign up if you're interested. And then in the meantime, next slide, please. We're launching a separate 5-part series exploring the tools and resources from the Energy Savings Performance Contracting Accelerator. So if you're interested in learning more about the innovative best practices developed in collaboration with about 25 state and local organizations through the ESPC Accelerator, I would encourage you to sign up for one of the 5 webinars in that series. The first one, titled Considering ESPC, will actually kick off next Thursday, April the 12th from 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern. And when you get these slides, you'll actually be able to click directly and register. Each of these is hyperlinked. Next slide, please. And then for those that enjoy the content of this webinar and are looking for more opportunities to learn more about this topic and others relevant to improving the efficiency of buildings, plants, and infrastructure, I would encourage you to join us at our upcoming Energy Exchange and Better Buildings Summit in Cleveland, Ohio. It'll be on August 21st through the 23rd. And registration is actually open now, so I would encourage you to register soon if you're interested. Next slide, please. And with that, again, I'd like to thank our panelists very much for taking the time to be with us today, for sharing their insights. They have kindly agreed to provide their contact information, so if folks have some additional questions that we weren't able to address, or other questions, feel free to contact them at the email addresses provided here. If you'd like to learn more about the Better Buildings Challenge or Alliance, please check our website, or feel free to contact me or my colleague Holly Carr at the email addresses shown. And I would also encourage you to follow the Better Buildings Initiative on Twitter for all of the latest news and alerts. And then finally, as I mentioned, you'll receive an email notice when the archive of this session is available online. So keep a lookout for that. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us. Have a great rest of your week.